Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When a rugged Texas rancher receives a mysterious $137,000 bill from a luxury neighborhood he never joined, it sparks a wildfire of lies, forged documents, and one hell of a courtroom showdown. What follows is a battle of land, legacy, and the unstoppable grit of a man wronged. I was born on this land, and I reckon I'll die on it too. My name's Clint Barrows. I'm 55 years old, and I own a 160-acre ranch in the heart of Texas. Rolling hills, old oak trees, pastures wide enough to lose a horse in, and a house that's been in my family since 1931. My granddad built the place with his own two hands after scraping together enough during the Great Depression to buy the land outright. My daddy grew up here, then raised me here. And now, well, it's mine. Always has been. Always will be. This land's more than just dirt and fences to me. It's legacy. It's where I learned to ride before I could walk, where we buried 3 dogs and 1 tractor, where I split my knuckles more times than I care to count fixing engines in the barn. Every fence post has a story. Every patch of soil has seen generations of Barrows sweat into it. It's not just home, it's sacred. For the longest time, we didn't have neighbors. Just cattle, coyotes, and the occasional buzzard when a storm rolled through. But about 30 years ago, developers started sniffing around the area, buying up tracts of land to turn into what they called exclusive communities. Big fancy gates, cookie-cutter mansions, and neighbors who wave more out of obligation than friendliness. One of those neighborhoods popped up right along my southern border. Silver Pines or Silver something, I never bothered to remember, came with its own HOA, of course, which I figured was none of my concern. Live and let live, right? At first, they kept to their side, and I kept to mine. They paved roads. I stuck to dirt. They watered manicured lawns. I mended fences and moved cattle. They flew drones over their pools. I watched hawks circle overhead. 2 different worlds, side by side, barely acknowledging each other, and frankly, I preferred it that way. I didn't need their rules, and they sure didn't need a rancher tracking mud onto their cobblestone streets. So for 30 years, I minded my business, paid my taxes, worked my land, and left the HOA crowd to their wine tastings and yard inspections. I figured as long as they didn't try to rope me into their nonsense, we'd coexist just fine. But I guess even fences can't keep out arrogance forever. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning when the storm started brewing, not in the sky, but in my damn mailbox. I just finished feeding the horses and was walking back up the gravel drive with a cup of coffee in one hand and the mail in the other. Usually it's the same old stuff, feed catalogs, utility bills, and the occasional flyer for a church fish fry. But that morning, there was a heavy envelope with a glossy seal stamped on the front like it was some kind of royal decree. Silver Pines Homeowners Association, it read in bold letters right beneath a little tree logo that looked like it had never seen real dirt. I frowned. They'd never contacted me before. Hell, I'd made it a point to ignore them for decades. But curiosity got the better of me, so I sliced it open with my pocket knife right there on the porch. Inside was a stack of neatly printed pages, official looking, with watermarks, headers, and all the self-importance of a bad novel. The first page was a formal notice. Outstanding fees owed $137,000. I blinked, thought maybe I was misreading. The next page laid it out in detail. HOA dues from 1973 to 2023, plus late penalties, interest accrued, and a compliance assessment surcharge. I had to sit down. There was even a breakdown of the charges. $200 per year in base dues, starting from a time when neither the HOA nor their community even existed. They had backdated fees to a point in history where Nixon was still in office and my dad was still running the ranch. And then came the cherry on top, a threat of legal action if I didn't pay in full within 30 days. I read the pages again, slower this time, and laughed out loud. One of those laughs that's more disbelief than amusement. These people were billing me for 50 years of imaginary membership in a group I had never joined, never signed anything for, and whose little suburban kingdom didn't even break ground until 1996. I checked their evidence. A map with a big red outline sloppily extended to include the southernmost part of my land. Convenient, illegal too. I didn't wait. I called the number listed at the bottom of the letter. A chirpy voicemail answered first, but I didn't hang up. I pressed 0 until a real person picked up. "This is Karen Larson, president of Silver Pines HOA," came a voice like ice in a martini glass. "Karen," I said slowly, "you sent me a bill for $137,000. "Yes," she replied, completely unbothered. "We recently conducted a retroactive community audit and found that your land benefits from proximity to Silver Pines. Therefore, you're subject to adjusted dues." "Adjusted for what?" I snapped. "This land has been in my family since 1931. You people didn't even exist until the 90s. "Well, sir, property lines evolve," she said, like she was talking to a toddler. "And your continued use of the adjacent terrain, such as road access and visibility, has had historic impact on community maintenance." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Let me make this clear. I'm not part of your HOA. I don't owe you a damn thing." "Well," she replied with syrupy menace, "you can choose to cooperate now, or we'll let the courts sort it out. Either way, we'll get what's owed." She hung up. I stared at the silent phone for a long moment, then set down my coffee and muttered, "Oh, you have no idea who you're dealing with." The next morning, I drove straight into town with that envelope in the passenger seat, like it was radioactive. I wasn't angry anymore, at least not the kind of hot-headed mad that makes you yell at an empty room. No, this was colder, focused, the kind of anger that sharpens into purpose, and I knew just where to take it. My attorney, Rachel Gray, has been handling my legal matters for over a decade, sharp as a tack, tougher than barbed wire, and blessed with the patience of someone who's seen one too many HOA board members try to play legal chicken. Her office sits in a modest red brick building tucked between the feed store and the diner. When I walked in, she looked up from a stack of folders and grinned. "Clint," she said, "you only come in when someone's made a terrible mistake. Who's the unlucky soul this time?" I dropped the HOA packet on her desk without a word. She opened it, read the first page, then the second. By the third, she let out a low whistle. $137 grand? She said, flipping through the pages. "For 50 years of HOA dues. Are they high or just stupid?" "Maybe both," I muttered. Rachel leaned back in her chair and stared at me for a long moment. "You're not in their HOA." "Nope." "Never signed anything?" "Not once. Never even walked through their little gate unless I was chasing a stray calf." She smirked. "Well, this'll be fun." Over the next couple hours, we pulled out everything. My grandfather's deed from 1931, which predated even the county's zoning map. The will that transferred ownership to my father, then to me. A folder full of annual tax assessments, all filed under a rural designation. And the crown jewel, a letter from 1996 written by the original Silver Pines developer himself, which stated in plain black ink that parcel 231B, Barrow's property, is excluded from the Silver Pines Community Charter due to pre-existing independent status. In legal speak, that's a silver bullet. Rachel grinned like a wolf. "You know what this is, Clint. This is a setup for a countersuit." I raised an eyebrow. "Countersuit? They haven't even sued yet." She leaned forward. "Oh, they will. People like this never back off when they're wrong. They double down. Right now, they're probably huddled in a room patting themselves on the back for sending that letter. They think you'll panic and pay. They're not expecting a fight, let alone a legally airtight one." I nodded slowly. "So what do we do?" "We let them sue," she said, eyes glinting. "And when they do, we bury them. Fraudulent demand for payment, slander of title, harassment, and maybe, if we dig deep enough, criminal misrepresentation." She stood and walked over to a cabinet full of dusty binders. "I'll file a formal response to the letter, denying all claims and demanding retraction. But we won't press first. Let them hang themselves with their own rope." "You're enjoying this a little too much," I said. "Damn right," she replied, flipping open a binder with the enthusiasm of a hunter sighting a trophy buck. "Let them come. We've got 90 years of paperwork on our side, and they've got, what? A fancy printer and a bad attitude." As I walked out of her office, I felt the same way I do after fixing a busted fence, satisfied, steady, and ready for whatever tried to charge through next. 2 weeks passed without a word, and for a moment, I let myself believe that maybe Rachel's letter had knocked some sense into them. Maybe they'd crawl back into their little gated kingdom and pretend none of this ever happened. But I should have known better. Folks like Karen Larson don't retreat. They escalate. It was a Thursday afternoon when I got served. A courier pulled up in a Prius, handed me a manila envelope, and drove off without so much as a nod. Inside was the lawsuit. Silver Pines Homeowners Association vs. Clint Barrows. I read the header 3 times just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. They'd actually gone through with it. I drove straight to Rachel's office again, and she greeted me like she'd been expecting me. "They pulled the trigger," I said, tossing the envelope onto her desk. Rachel flipped through the documents calmly, like she was reading the instructions on a cereal box. "Just as we thought. Let's see what kind of fiction they're peddling." It was worse than fiction. It was delusion. The filing claimed that my land had been in continuous proximity and visual influence on Silver Pines since its founding, and thus had always benefited from the neighborhood's aesthetic and environmental maintenance. They even attached aerial photos showing my pasture near their property line, claiming it was integrated into the community's visual harmony. I nearly choked when Rachel read that line aloud. But the kicker, they included a scanned amendment to their charter dated 1985, a full 11 years before the HOA was even founded, purporting that my parcel had always been intended as part of the Silver Pines expansion plan. It was signed poorly by a man who, according to county records, had died in 1983. Rachel closed the file and stared at the wall like she was trying to see into another dimension. Then she muttered, "They actually submitted forged documents in a court of law. This just went from stupid to criminal." "They really think this is going to work?" I asked, half in disbelief. "No," she said, standing and grabbing a legal pad. "They don't think at all. They panic. This is what happens when amateurs try to use the court system as a hammer. Now we go on offense." Over the next week, she filed our formal response, attaching the original developer letter, the historic land records, and a notarized affidavit from the county zoning office confirming my property was, and had always, been outside the Silver Pines jurisdiction. She also filed a motion to dismiss the case outright, citing abuse of process and fraud. Meanwhile, Karen Larson wasn't exactly keeping things quiet. She gave an interview to the local paper, smugly explaining how no property owner should be exempt from contributing to their community. She even hosted a town hall meeting in their clubhouse, where she handed out flyers showing my land circled, in red with the words, "Subject to community order, pending resolution." Neighbors who'd never so much as waved at me were suddenly driving by my gate slowly, like they were casing the place. One guy even stopped at the fence line, took a photo, and sped off. They were trying to intimidate me, make me feel outnumbered. But intimidation doesn't work on a man who's faced down bulls in mating season. I started documenting everything. Photos, security cam footage, copies of the flyers. Rachel told me to keep it all. "They're not just suing you," she said. "They're building a narrative. We're going to show the court exactly what kind of story it is. A fairy tale soaked in fraud." As court day approached, I found myself oddly calm. I wasn't scared. I wasn't worried. I was ready. They wanted a fight? They picked the wrong damn ranch. Court was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. I wore my cleanest jeans, a starched button-up, and boots that still had dust from the barn. Rachel told me to dress like who you are, but maybe without the oil stains. I sat beside her at the plaintiff's table, arms crossed, calm as a man who already knows how this is going to end. On the other side of the aisle, Karen Larson looked like she was headed to a corporate board meeting. Her blazer was white, her hair lacquered into place, and her expression smug enough to power a small engine. She had 2 lawyers with her. One looked barely old enough to shave, and the other wore a Bluetooth headset he refused to take out, even when the bailiff gave him a warning. The judge entered, a woman in her 60s with a tight silver bun and no patience for theatrics. She glanced over the docket, then at both parties. "Let's keep this brief and civil," she said flatly. "I understand there are significant allegations on both sides." Karen's lead attorney stood first, launching into a speech so polished it sounded rehearsed in front of a mirror. He talked about communal harmony, long-standing aesthetic integration, and informal acknowledgments of jurisdiction. He pointed to the aerial photos, said my land was indistinguishable from the community at a distance, and claimed their association had a moral and visual stake in my property. Rachel didn't interrupt. She didn't flinch. She just waited, patiently stacking a neat pile of folders beside her. When it was our turn, she stood like she was simply there to read facts off a grocery list. "Your Honor," she began, "we could spend all day discussing community harmony and visual boundaries, but this is a case about property law. And the law isn't based on how things look. It's based on documentation. She laid out the original deed from 1931, the county zoning map, the chain of ownership, the 1996 letter from Silver Pine's own developer explicitly stating my land was excluded from the HOA charter. Then she paused, smiled politely, and slid a final sheet toward the judge. "And this," she said, "is a notarized affidavit from the county registrar's office confirming that no legal documents have ever existed binding Mr. Barrow's property to the Silver Pines HOA, nor has any jurisdictional amendment been filed or approved that would include parcel 231B. Ever." The judge nodded. "Understood." "And the plaintiff's charter amendment dated 1985? Rachel leaned forward just enough to be lethal. "Your Honor, the plaintiff's amendment was allegedly signed in 1985, 11 years before the HOA legally existed. Furthermore, the individual who signed the document died 2 years prior. We've submitted both the death certificate and the founding date of the association to the court. We believe this document is not just irrelevant, it's fraudulent." That was the moment the courtroom shifted. Karen's expression cracked. Her jaw clenched. The younger lawyer fumbled with his notes. "The Bluetooth guy?" He finally took the earpiece out. Rachel wasn't done. "We're also submitting evidence that the HOA circulated misleading and defamatory materials about Mr. Barrows to other residents and the public, falsely asserting he owed dues and was in violation of community standards. These materials included falsified maps and threats of legal seizure." She turned, looked right at the judge. This was not a misunderstanding. It was a targeted, fraudulent campaign to extort money from a man whose property predates the plaintiff's existence by more than 6 decades. For a moment, the courtroom was dead quiet, except for the soft whir of the ceiling fan overhead. The judge looked over the evidence again. Her eyes narrowed. "I've seen enough," she said. "We'll break for deliberation, but I want to make it clear there are potential criminal implications in what I've read today. The court does not tolerate manufactured evidence." As the judge stood to exit, I caught Karen shooting daggers at Rachel, but my attorney didn't even blink. She was already organizing her files with the calm of someone who had just dropped a hammer on a termite nest. When we stepped into the hallway during recess, I asked her how she thought it went. She smirked. "I told you," she said. "Let them hang themselves with their own rope." The verdict came faster than I expected. We were barely back from recess when the judge re-entered the courtroom, holding a single sheet of paper and a look that could split granite. She took her seat, adjusted her glasses, and began without preamble. "This court finds that the claims brought forth by the Silver Pines Homeowners Association are without merit, unsupported by legal precedent, and in several instances constructed upon knowingly falsified documentation. The defendant, Mr. Clint Barrows, bears no legal or financial obligation to the Silver Pines HOA, and his property remains wholly independent of its jurisdiction." I heard Karen inhale sharply beside her attorneys, but it wasn't over. The judge continued, voice firm, deliberate. "Furthermore, the court is alarmed by the HOA's submission of a fraudulent amendment allegedly signed by a deceased individual, the distribution of misleading materials to the community, and the continued harassment of Mr. Barrows despite documented evidence contradicting their claims." Rachel leaned slightly toward me. "Watch this," she whispered. "Due to the severity of these actions," the judge went on, "the court is imposing the following penalties. First, the Silver Pines HOA is ordered to pay Mr. Barrows $90,000 in damages for legal expenses, defamation, and emotional distress. Second, a formal reprimand is being filed with the state HOA Oversight Board, and the HOA's operations will be placed under immediate administrative review by the county." There was a stunned silence in the room, just the scratching of a pen as the court reporter jotted it all down. "And finally," the judge said, fixing her gaze directly on Karen Larson, as the acting president of Silver Pines HOA and principal actor in the presentation of falsified materials, you are personally fined $15,000 for willful misrepresentation and attempted fraud. Further investigation will determine if criminal charges are warranted." Karen's face went pale. Her lawyers looked like they wanted to melt into the floor. Bluetooth Guy opened his mouth to speak, then wisely closed it again. "As of this ruling," the judge concluded, "the HOA's authority is suspended pending audit. This court is adjourned." The sound of the gavel striking wood was final, surgical, the way you'd slam a door on a snake. Outside the courtroom, reporters were already waiting. Word had spread fast in a small town where nothing ever happens unless it's on a football field or in court. Rachel spoke briefly to the press while I stood by her side, arms crossed, hat low over my eyes. I had no interest in fame, just justice. But people started approaching me anyway. Neighbors from the area, some I'd never spoken to, shook my hand, patted my shoulder. One man from the edge of the Silver Pines boundary told me quietly, "You have no idea how long we've wanted someone to take them down." I nodded, but didn't say much. I'm not a man of speeches. I'd let the ruling speak for itself. The following days were chaos. For them, not me. HOA operations were frozen. Karen's photo was plastered across the county news. The oversight board stepped in, and within a week, a temporary administrator was appointed. HOA meetings were canceled. Their legal fund dried up overnight. And the cherry on top, my mailbox, once stuffed with threats, started receiving apologies. One came from a former board member who confessed in writing that Karen had pressured him into supporting the bogus charter extension. Another came from a woman who admitted she'd posted the neighborhood flyers but hadn't realized they were based on falsified maps. "I thought we were protecting our homes," she wrote. "Turns out we were just being used." Karen, meanwhile, vanished from the neighborhood almost overnight. Her house went up for sale within a month. Rumor was she'd moved 2 counties over, someplace quieter, where nobody knew her name. I didn't care where she went, as long as it wasn't back through my fence line. Rachel and I kept in touch through it all. She framed a copy of the ruling and gave me one to hang on the wall of my office. "A reminder," she said, "that paperwork beats posturing every single time." I didn't hang it in the office, though. I had another idea. A week after the court ruling, I had a sign custom-made and planted it right at the edge of my gravel driveway, just past the cattle guard where the old oak leans toward the road like it's listening. Bold black letters on a polished wooden board, sealed against rain and Texas sun, carved to last. Barrows Ranch, established 1931 before the HOA, beyond the HOA. Above the HOA, just beneath it, mounted in a clear protective frame bolted to the post, was a full-sized, notarized copy of the court's ruling, complete with the county seal in crisp red ink and the judge's signature shining like a branding iron. Some folks thought it was petty. Others thought it was brilliant. I didn't do it for either reason. I did it because, after months of legal games, lies, and attempted extortion, I wanted the truth to sit where it could be read by anyone driving past, especially the ones who used to slow roll their Teslas by my fence line. I made no apologies. The day after I put the sign up, I took my truck for a slow roll through Silver Pines. Just once. No honking, no shouting, just a respectful cruise. Their manicured roads looked quieter than usual. The HOA office had its blinds drawn, and the community bulletin board was empty, except for a lone notice about upcoming elections. Elections that would now be supervised by a county-appointed trustee. But as I passed the office, I couldn't help myself. I tapped the horn 3 times, short and sharp. Not in anger, just enough to say, "You remember me now." Back home, life returned to normal fast. The pastures didn't care about lawsuits, and the tractor still needed maintenance. I found peace in the rhythm of honest work again, mending fences, baling hay, feeding the herd. The land had waited patiently while I dealt with nonsense. It was glad to have me back, and I was glad to be grounded in something real again. Rachel stopped by one evening with a bottle of good whiskey and a grin. "To the ranch," she said, raising a glass on my porch. "And to boundaries that matter." I raised mine back. "To old lines drawn right, and new ones that never should have been." The sun dipped low behind the hills, casting that golden stretch of light across the grass, the kind that makes everything look like it's made of fire and memory. I sat there a long time after she left, sipping slow, listening to the cicadas take over the night. Somewhere out there, Karen Larson was probably still telling herself she was right, maybe blaming the lawyers, the judge, the board, maybe all 3. But out here, where the crickets drowned out the nonsense and the stars don't ask permission to shine, none of that mattered. The land was mine. Always had been. Always would be.